He demanded $60,000 for the villa. Then one phone call silenced the room. Pay $60,000 or the villa transfer deal is off. My son's fiancé told me that thinking I was just some low-ranking civil servant who'd been put out to pasture years ago. My name is Clarence Boyle. What Prescott Ellington III didn't know was that the $5 million beachfront villa his family had owned for generations, the one they were so generously planning to transfer as a wedding gift, was tied up in a historic preservation approval that went straight through City Hall. He thought he was strong-arming a broke retiree who drove a 15-year-old pickup and lived in a modest ranch house a few miles inland. Instead, 24 hours after his little ultimatum, he was watching that entire villa deal collapse in front of 200 of his family's closest friends. Sometimes the people who look the least threatening turn out to be the ones you should never underestimate. I stayed quiet while he laid out his demands. I nodded politely when he hinted the wedding plans might have to change if the money didn't appear. And then I made one phone call that ended everything he thought he had. If you've ever been looked down on because of your job, your car, your neighborhood, or what people assume about your bank account, this story is for you. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around to see exactly how this played out. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and whether anyone's ever underestimated you because of your background or profession. I read every single comment, and I promise the ending is worth waiting for. It all started 8 months ago when my son Audran brought his fiancée Dwarian home for the first time and introduced the man she was marrying, Prescott Ellington III. I could tell from the moment Prescott stepped out of his gleaming black Range Rover and scanned our quiet street that he wasn't impressed. But what he didn't realize was that the real power in this town doesn't always come with a shiny new car or a waterfront address. And by the night of their big engagement banquet, he was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 8 months ago, my son Audran called and said he wanted to bring his fiancée Dwarian home for dinner and introduce the man she was marrying, Prescott Ellington III. I told him to come on a Saturday when I wasn't tied up with anything. I figured it would be a normal evening grilling some fish on the back porch of our ranch house a few miles inland from the main Outer Banks strip. Audran had been dating Dorian for almost a year by then. He sounded excited on the phone, said things were getting serious, and that Prescott came from a well-established family with deep roots along the coast. When they pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I was out front washing my 15-year-old Ford pickup. It had a few dents, and the paint was faded from years of salt air, but it still ran fine and got me where I needed to go. Prescott stepped out of a brand-new silver Mercedes first. He was tall, neatly groomed, wearing pressed khakis and a polo that probably cost more than my monthly power bill. He adjusted his sunglasses and looked around the street. Modest homes, small yards, kids riding bikes, nothing flashy. Dwarian climbed out next, smiling wide, and gave me a hug. "Mr. Boyle, it's so good to finally meet you properly." She had a warm voice and seemed genuinely happy to be there. Audran came around the car, last carrying a bottle of wine. "Dad, this is Prescott Ellington III." Prescott extended a hand grip, firm but quick. "Clarence." "Pleasure." I wiped my hands on a rag and shook it. "Call me Clarence. Come on inside." As we walked up the short driveway, I caught Prescott scanning the house single-story brick ranch aluminum siding that could use a pressure wash basic landscaping I did myself. His expression stayed polite, but his eyes gave him away. Inside the living room was comfortable, but nothing fancy. Family photos on the walls, worn leather couch coffee table I'd built years ago. Dwarian sat down and started asking about the pictures right away, especially the ones of Audran growing up. Prescott stayed standing a moment longer, taking it all in. "So Audran tells me you worked for the city for a long time." "That's right," I said, heading to the kitchen to grab some drinks. "Civil service. Retired a few years back." He nodded slowly. "Must be nice having all that free time now." There was a pause in his tone, like he was calculating something. I let it go and offered everyone a beer or iced tea. Dwarian jumped in, trying to keep things light. Dad Prescott's family has this amazing beachfront property up near Corolla. It's been in their family since the 1920s. Prescott smiled for the first time, thin and controlled. Yes, it's one of the original historic homes on that stretch. Quite a responsibility maintaining it. I handed him a glass of tea. Sounds like a beautiful place? It is, he said, glancing around our living room again. Though upkeep on something like that requires certain resources. Audran shot him a quick look, but Prescott just sipped his drink. We moved out to the porch for dinner. I had the grill going, fresh mahi-mahi from the market down the road. Dorian helped set the table and kept the conversation going, asking about my years with the city, what I did day to day. I kept it simple. Mostly administrative work. Paperwork, budgets, dealing with permits and approvals. Nothing too exciting. Prescott leaned back in his chair. Permits and approvals. That can be such a headache, can't it? Especially for larger properties. He said it casually, but I caught the edge, like he was already sizing up whether I could be useful or not. Dwarian laughed nervously. Prescott's family has dealt with a lot of preservation board requirements over the years. Prescott nodded. Exactly. Some people understand how those processes work. Others, well, they just don't have the experience. Audran changed the subject to Dwarian's new job at the hospital, and the rest of the meal went smoother on the surface. But I noticed the little things. The way Prescott's eyes lingered on my old truck when we walked them back to the car. The faint smirk when he commented on how quiet our neighborhood was compared to the soundfront areas. As they drove off, Dorian waved enthusiastically from the passenger seat. Audran gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks, Dad. That went well." I stood in the driveway a minute longer, watching the Mercedes disappear down the street. Prescott had spent the whole evening establishing distance. The car, the clothes, the casual mentions of historic property and preservation boards. He was marking territory, letting me know where he thought we stood. What he didn't know was how familiar I actually was with those preservation boards and city approvals. But that was still months away from coming out. For now, I just went back inside, cleaned up the grill, and figured I'd see how things played out. A few weeks later, Audran invited me over to the small apartment he shared with Dwarian near the hospital where she worked. Prescott was already there when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of glossy photos spread out in front of him. Audran greeted me at the door with a big grin. "Dad, come check this out. Prescott has something he wants to run by you." I stepped inside and nodded to everyone. Dorian gave me a quick hug. "Hi, thanks for coming on short notice." Prescott stood and shook my hand. "Clarence, good to see you again." He gestured to the photos. They were all of the same property, a sprawling beachfront villa up near Corolla, white columns, wide verandas, direct access to the dunes. It looked like something out of a magazine spread on old southern coastal homes. "This is the Ellington family estate." Prescott said, pride clear in his voice. Built in the 1920s, one of the few originals left on that stretch of the Outer Banks. Audran couldn't take his eyes off the pictures. "It's incredible, Dad. 10 bedrooms, private boardwalk to the beach, even its own guest cottage." Dorian sat down next to Prescott and picked up one of the photos. "The views are unbelievable. You can see the ocean from almost every room." Prescott tapped another image, an aerial shot showing the full layout. "My parents have been talking about the wedding gift situation. They want to do something meaningful that represents both families coming together." He paused and looked straight at me. "They're willing to transfer full ownership of the villa to Audran and Dorian as soon as the marriage is official. It'll be their home, free and clear." Audran's mouth dropped open. "You're serious?" "The whole place?" Prescott smiled. "Absolutely. It's been in the family for generations, but my parents feel it's time for the next chapter. A wedding gift like this sets the couple up for life." Dwarian reached over and squeezed Audran's hand. "Can you imagine our own beachfront home right out of college and residency?" I leaned in to look closer at the photos. The place was impressive, no question. That's quite an offer, I said. Very generous. Prescott nodded. It is. But there's a catch, because it's on the State Historic Register and in the city's coastal preservation zone. Any ownership transfer requires special approval from both the local council and the North Carolina Historic Preservation Office. He pulled out a folder with official-looking documents. These are the preliminary applications: surveys, environmental reports, architectural reviews. The whole process can drag on for months, sometimes longer. Audran flipped through the papers, excitement fading a little. So we have to get all this approved before the transfer can happen. Exactly, Prescott said. And with a wedding to plan, we'd like to move things along as quickly as possible. Secure the date. Start thinking about hosting guests there. Dwarian looked at me hopefully. You worked with city approvals for years. You must know how these things go. I kept my expression neutral. I've seen a few permit applications in my time. Historic properties always have extra layers. Prescott leaned forward. Which is why timing matters. If everything lines up, the villa could be in Audran and Dorian's name by next summer. They could even hold the reception there. Audran's eyes lit up again. A wedding on the beach right outside the house. That would be unreal. But then he glanced at me and I saw the worry creep in. He knew my pension wasn't large. He'd grown up watching me balance budgets, fix things myself, drive the same truck forever. In his mind, a gift this size was something only one side of the family could afford. Prescott kept talking, outlining potential timelines, mentioning names of people on the preservation board, dropping hints about how certain connections could help speed reviews. Dwaran listened intently, nodding along. It would mean everything to start our life together in a place like that. Audran put his arm around her. We'd make it our own. Raise a family there someday. I watched my son saw how much he wanted this, how the idea had already taken root. He believed the villa was the key to the future Prescott and his family were offering. Prescott gathered the photos back into a neat stack. We just need to make sure all parties are committed to making this happen smoothly. His eyes met mine for a second longer than necessary. The message was subtle, but clear. This kind of gesture came with expectations. Audran walked me out to my truck afterward. He waited until we were alone before speaking. Dad, what do you think? It's insane, right? A place like that? It's a hell of a gift. I agreed. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, I know it's all coming from their side. I wish we could contribute something bigger, you know. Make it feel more equal. I put a hand on his shoulder. You're contributing you. That's plenty. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was already doing the math in his head, wondering how his old man could possibly match something on this scale. As I drove home, the images of that villa stayed with me. Not because of the size or the view, but because of what it represented to Prescott, a way to anchor the marriage firmly in his family's world. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was going over some old fishing logs in my den. My cell rang with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Clarence Boyle speaking. A brief pause, then Prescott's voice smooth and direct. Mr. Boyle, it's Prescott Ellington. Do you have a minute? I leaned back in my chair. Sure. What's on your mind? I'll get straight to it. The villa transfer, we're all excited about moving forward, but the approval process is the bottleneck. He didn't waste time on small talk. These historic preservation reviews can stall indefinitely unless the right people prioritize them. Expedited handling isn't free. I stayed quiet, letting him lay it out. Prescott continued. There are consulting fees, accelerated survey costs, administrative expenses to get the file pushed to the top of the council agenda. All told, it comes to about $60,000. $60,000, spoken like it was pocket change. If your side can cover that, he said, we can have preliminary approval within weeks instead of months. The villa becomes Audran and Dwarian's without delay. Your side. That was the first time he'd phrased it that way so openly. I kept my tone even. And if that doesn't happen, then we're looking at the standard timeline. Could stretch past a year. By then, who knows, my parents might reconsider the whole arrangement if it feels too drawn out. The threat was wrapped in practicality, but it landed clear enough. Weddings are expensive anyway, he added. This would actually save money in the long run by securing the property early. I heard Audron's voice in the background, muffled, asking who was on the phone. Prescott covered the receiver for a second, said something I couldn't catch, then came back. Look, I'm being upfront because we're practically family now. This keeps everything on track and shows both sides are invested. Invested. Another word for paying admission. I asked the only question that mattered. Have you discussed this number with Audron? Not the specifics yet. I wanted to speak man to man first. Get your thoughts before bringing the kids into it. The kids. Like my 30-year-old son was still a teenager. I told him I'd need time to think it over. Of course, Prescott said, but the Preservation Office has a council meeting coming up in 3 weeks. If we want that slot, decisions need to happen soon. He ended the call with a polite goodbye, leaving the deadline hanging in the air. I set the phone down and sat there a long minute. Audron called less than an hour later, voice tight. Dad, Prescott just told me about the expediting costs for the villa. 60,000. I could hear the strain in him. He said it's the only way to make the transfer realistic before the wedding. Audron lowered his voice. I don't know what to do. I know that kind of money isn't something you just have sitting around. But if we don't, everything slows down, maybe falls apart. He sounded torn up, caught between wanting the future being offered and not wanting to put pressure on me. I told him we'd figure something out, Audron said. But honestly, Dad, I feel sick about it. I reassured him the best I could without giving anything away. Told him not to worry yet, that these things had a way of working themselves out. After we hung up, I stared at the phone a while longer. Prescott had shown his hand. He wasn't just offering a gift, he was setting a price for entry into his world. That night, I made a few quiet calls of my own. First to my sister Agnes, who'd taken over as vice mayor after I stepped down. She picked up on the second ring. It's me, I said. Need a favor. Can you pull the current file on the Ellington beachfront property in Corolla, the one flagged for ownership transfer? She didn't ask why right away, just said she'd get on it first thing in the morning. Next, I reached out to an old contact still on the Preservation Commission, someone who owed me from years back when I'd helped push through funding for coastal restoration. We kept it brief. I asked for a complete history of the villa's file, any holds pending reviews, past applications. By morning, emails started coming in. Copies of forms, meeting minutes, notes from site visits. Nothing dramatic on the surface, but enough to see exactly where the leverage points were. I went through every page, carefully marking sections that dealt with council discretion and public interest clauses. Prescott thought he was dealing with a retired clerk who might scrape together the cash or back down. He had no idea the file was now sitting in front of someone who knew every line of those regulations better than most. I didn't say a word to Audron about any of it. He was already carrying enough weight. For now, I just gathered the information and waited to see how far Prescott planned to push. The following weekend, I suggested to Audron that we grab lunch, just the two of us, at a little seafood place right off the boardwalk. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept much, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders tense even in the salt breeze. We took a table outside, waves crashing in the background, gulls circling overhead. The server brought us iced tea and a basket of hush puppies while we waited for our food. Audron picked at the breading but didn't eat. Dad, I've been turning this over all week. I gave him space to talk. He stared out at the ocean a minute. Ever since Prescott laid out that expediting number, things feel off, like I'm not quite measuring up in their eyes. I sipped my tea and listened. It's not just the money, he went on. It's the way they talk about contributions and balance. Like my side of the family needs to prove something before I'm fully accepted. He finally turned toward me. I catch these little comments from Prescott's parents when we're over there for dinner, about how certain lifestyles come with responsibilities, or how lucky Douarian is to be joining a family with established assets. Audran crumbled a hush puppy between his fingers. And then, there's the villa. It's incredible, don't get me wrong. But it feels like the whole thing is conditional. Like if we don't come through on our end, maybe I'm not the right fit after all. His voice cracked just a little on that last part. I set my glass down. You feel like you're being sized up? Exactly, he said. Like I'm this project they're investing in, but only if the return looks good. Douarian doesn't say it outright, but I see it in how she hesitates sometimes when money topics come up. He rubbed his face. I love her, Dad. I really do. But I'm starting to wonder if I belong in that world. If they look at me and see someone who's always going to be the one from the modest side. The server brought our plates, fried flounder for him, shrimp basket for me, but Audran barely touched his. I grew up fixing things with you in the garage, he said quietly, saving for what we wanted. Nothing was handed over, and I'm proud of that. But around Prescott's circle, it feels like that's a liability. He pushed a fry around his plate. Sometimes I think they're waiting for me to change, to start acting a certain way, talking about investments or club memberships. And when I don't, there's this polite disappointment. I nodded slowly. Pride in where you come from isn't a liability, son. It's the foundation. He gave a small, tired smile. I know you believe that. You've lived it. But it's hard when the person you want to build a life with is tied so tightly to people who see things differently. Audran leaned forward. What would you do if it was you in my shoes? I thought carefully before answering. I'd ask myself what kind of partnership I want long term. One where both people feel equal respected for who they are, not what they bring to the table. He absorbed that. Nobody should have to audition to be loved, I added, or to feel secure in a relationship. If you're already questioning your place this early, that's worth paying attention to. Audran exhaled slowly. Yeah, I've been telling myself it's just wedding stress, that things will settle once everything's official. But deep down, I know it's more than that. We sat in silence for a bit, just the sound of the waves and distant laughter from other tables. He finally picked up his fork. Thanks for listening, Dad. I didn't want to dump all this on Douarian right now. She's excited about the future they're painting. I reached across and squeezed his arm. You don't have to carry it alone. And you don't have to change who you are to fit someone else's picture. Audran nodded, some of the tension easing from his face. I needed to hear that. We finished lunch talking about lighter things, his work at the clinic, a fishing trip we should plan soon. By the time we parted in the parking lot, he looked a little steadier. Driving home, I thought about how much he was wrestling with. He'd always been the kid who earned everything through effort, never expecting handouts. Watching him question his worth because of someone else's expectations hit hard, but I still kept my own history quiet. It wasn't the right moment to shift the ground under him. He needed to work through his feelings first on his own terms. A couple of weeks after that, the invitation arrived on heavy cream stock, the Ellington family requesting the pleasure of my company at the engagement banquet for Audran and Douarian at the Ocean Crest Country Club. Saturday evening, black tie optional. Audran called the day before, nervous. Dad, you'll come right. Prescott's parents really want the families to mix before final plans. I told him I wouldn't miss it. I drove my pickup to the club, handed the keys to the valet, who barely hid his surprise at the vehicle among the rows of luxury sedans. Inside, the main ballroom overlooked the dunes, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the dark ocean beyond. About 150 guests milled around cocktails and hand-soft jazz from a quartet in the corner. Audran spotted me first and waved me over to a cluster near the bar. Douarian stood beside him in a simple navy dress, looking relieved when I arrived. Thank you for coming, she said, giving me a quick hug. Prescott shook my hand firmly. Clarence, glad you could make it. His parents were right there. Stanley Ellington, tall and silver-haired, offered a handshake that lingered just long enough to assess. Mildred Ellington smiled politely, eyes flicking over my dark suit from the department store rack. Mr. Boyle, Stanley said, Prescott tells us you spent years in city administration. That's correct, I replied. Mildred tilted her head. Such steady work. Though I imagine the pay scale is quite modest compared to private sector opportunities. A couple nearby chuckled softly. Stanley turned to the group. Clarence here kept the wheels turning down at City Hall. Essential Services right, one of Prescott's law partners joined in. I dealt with permitting offices plenty. Always interesting dealing with the bureaucracy. More polite laughter. Dwarian shifted uncomfortably. Audran put an arm around her. Prescott raised his voice slightly to include everyone. We're thrilled to welcome Audran's family into ours, though blending different backgrounds can take some adjustment. Stanley nodded. Absolutely. We've been fortunate to maintain certain standards over generations. A woman in pearls leaned in. I saw your truck outside Mr. Boyle. Very practical. The group smiled at that. Someone else added, keeps you grounded, I suppose. I kept my expression neutral and sipped the club soda the bartender handed me. The conversation drifted to vacation homes, private schools, upcoming charity auctions. Every time I spoke answering a direct question about local history or weather patterns, the responses carried that same faint condescension. Mildred asked about my home. Do you live right on the Sound, or more inland? A few miles back, I said. Quiet neighborhood. Stanley chuckled. Yes, we know those areas well. Solid working families. Prescott steered things back to the villa. Speaking of property, Mother and Father are finalizing details on the Corolla transfer. It'll make a spectacular start for the newlyweds. Applause rippled around the circle. One of the partners raised his glass. Generous gift. Though I hear those historic approvals can be a nightmare. Prescott glanced at me. They can. Unless everyone pulls together to make it happen smoothly. Stanley addressed the group loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. We've asked for a meaningful contribution from Audran's side to help expedite the process. Fair way to show commitment from both families. Mildred added, 60,000 covers the necessary fees and keeps the timeline tight. A few eyebrows rose appreciatively. Someone murmured, reasonable ask, considering the value. Prescott smiled directly at me. We're still waiting on confirmation, of course, but I'm sure a retired civil servant understands the importance of meeting deadlines. Laughter spread louder this time. Dwarian's face flushed. Audran stared at the floor. Another guest, an older man with a yacht club pin, spoke up. Nothing wrong with keeping expectations realistic. Not everyone can match that level of asset transfer. Stanley patted Prescott's shoulder. Exactly. We're doing our part. The rest is about proportionality. The comments kept coming wrapped in toasts and congratulations, each one landing like a small cut. A woman suggested perhaps a simpler venue if timing becomes an issue. There are lovely community halls inland. More chuckles. Prescott raised his glass toward me. To family unity and to everyone contributing what they can. The group drank to that, eyes on me waiting for a reaction. Audran finally spoke, voice low. That's enough. But the damage was done. The entire room had heard the price tag attached to my son's future, heard the assumption that I couldn't or wouldn't meet it. Dwarian looked close to tears. I stood there, drink in hand, letting the words settle around me. They thought they were performing for a harmless retiree who would shrink under the spotlight. Instead, they'd just handed me every reason I needed. Right there at the banquet, with the laughter still hanging in the air, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I hadn't used publicly in years. The room noise continued around me, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, but I kept my voice calm. Agnes answered on the second ring. Clarence. It's time, I said. Put me on speaker with Thomas. A brief shuffle, then Thomas Reed's voice came on the line, steady as always. Clarence. What's going on? I looked straight at Prescott while I spoke. The Ellington Villa transfer file in Corolla. I need an emergency hold and full denial of approval. Thomas didn't hesitate. Grounds violation of procedural integrity and conflict with community interest standards. Attempt to expedite through improper financial influence. Agnes jumped in. We have documentation supporting that. Everything you need is already in the system from the review I requested last week. Pull it now. A few keyboard clicks carried over the speaker. Thomas spoke again. Files up. I see the flags. This falls under discretionary authority for public trust protection. Then exercise it, I said. Deny the transfer effective immediately. Stanley Ellington's face went pale. What the hell is this? I held the phone higher so the speaker carried clearly. Approved, Thomas said. Denial order signed electronically. Notification will go out first thing Monday, but the hold is active now. Agnes added council records will reflect the decision tonight. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The ballroom had gone quiet. Guests at nearby tables stopped mid-sentence, sensing the shift. Prescott stared at me. Who was that? I met his eyes. My sister Agnes Boyle, current vice mayor, and Thomas Reed, chairman of the city council. Mildred's hand went to her throat. You're claiming influence over the approval process? Not claiming, I said. I spent 24 years as mayor of this town. Stepped down 5 years ago. Every preservation rule, every council procedure, I helped write half of them. Oderon turned to me, shock all over his face. Dad! Mayor Stanley stepped forward. This is absurd. You can't block a private transfer because of a personal grudge. It's not personal, I replied. It's policy. Attempts to bypass standard review through financial pressure trigger automatic denial under the Public Integrity Clause. Thomas had texted confirmation while I spoke. Order processed. File locked. Prescott's voice rose. You've been lying this whole time, pretending to be some broke retiree. I never pretended anything I said. You assumed because of my truck, my house, my clothes. I let you. Dorian looked between us, eyes wide. You were mayor. I nodded once. Mildred tried to regain control. There must be a misunderstanding. We can discuss this privately. No need, I said. The decision is final. The villa stays as is until a clean application goes through normal channels. Which, given the flags, won't happen. Stanley pulled out his own phone, fingers shaking as he dialed. I'm calling the city attorney. Go ahead, I told him. He'll confirm the order. Prescott turned to Oderon. Say something. Tell him to back off. Oderon didn't look at him right away. He stared at me, processing everything. Dwarian spoke first, voice, trembling but firm. All of this, the money demand, the public comments tonight, it wasn't about the villa. It was about making us feel small. Prescott reached for her hand. Dorian, come on. This is just a mix-up. She pulled away. No, it's not. You let your parents turn my future father-in-law into a punchline. You announced that price tag like it was nothing. Oderon finally spoke, quiet but clear. I've been feeling it for weeks. Like I had to prove I was good enough for your family. Prescott's face flushed. That's not... It is. Oderon cut in. And now I find out my dad could have shut this down any time, but he waited to see what kind of people we were dealing with. He looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed you to see it for yourself, I said. I wanted you to choose based on who they really are, not who I am. Dwarian took off the engagement ring, a diamond that caught the chandelier light as she set it on a nearby table. I'm sorry, Prescott. I can't do this. Prescott's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Oderon faced him directly. We're done. The silence spread across the entire ballroom. Guests pretended not to stare, but everyone heard. Stanley tried one last time. You're throwing away a $5 million property over pride. It was never about the property, Oderon said. It was about respect. Dwarian stepped closer to Oderon. I choose respect. Prescott looked around the room, realizing every eye was on him. His parents stood frozen. I put a hand on Oderon's shoulder. Let's go. As we walked toward the exit, no one spoke. The jazz quartet had even stopped playing. Outside, the valet brought my pickup without a word. Audran and Douarian climbed in with me. We drove in silence for a minute before Audran said, "Dad, I had no idea." "I know," I replied. "And now you do." Douarian leaned forward from the back seat. "Thank you. For everything." I glanced at them in the rearview mirror. You both stood up when it counted. That's what matters. The club lights faded behind us as we headed inland. A few weeks later, the local paper ran the story on the front page. Historic Corolla beachfront villa headed to public auction after ownership transfer denial. The Ellington name appeared in bold letters along with details of the council's decision to protect procedural integrity. By the end of the month, the property sold at auction to an out-of-state developer for $4.1 million, well under market value after legal holds and rushed sale costs. The family walked away with almost nothing once fees were settled. Prescott's position at the coastal law firm disappeared quietly. Partners cited conduct inconsistent with professional standards, especially after word spread about the attempted influence on public officials. Invitations to club events stopped arriving. Old connections suddenly had full schedules when the Ellingtons called. Stanley and Mildred kept a lower profile, spending more time off the Outer Banks. Prescott tried reaching Audran a handful of times, texts, voicemails, even a letter delivered to the apartment. Audran deleted them without reply. Douarian moved out shortly after the banquet and blocked every number tied to the Ellingtons. One evening, Audran showed up at my place with a six-pack and a pizza from the spot we used to go to when he was in high school. We sat on the porch watching the sunset over the inland waterway. He took a long drink before speaking. "Dad, I keep thinking about everything you built here. The years running the town, making decisions that affected everybody, and then choosing to step back and live simple." I shrugged. Fancy addresses never mattered much to me. He nodded. "I get that now. Growing up, I thought we were just regular. Turns out you were the one keeping this whole area running straight." Audran set his bottle down. "I'm proud of where I come from. Proud of you. And I'm glad I saw the truth before tying my life to people who measure worth by property lines." We talked about his new job offer at a community clinic, better hours work that felt meaningful. He mentioned dating someone new, slowly, no pressure, someone who liked fishing and didn't care about club memberships. No word ever came from the Ellington side again. No apologies, no attempts to mend fences. The break was clean and permanent. Word traveled fast in local circles. A few other families with pending historic applications reached out to the council asking about fair process rules. Some even switched representation away from Prescott's old firm. Audran started volunteering with the Coastal Preservation Group, using what he'd learned about the system to help first-time homeowners navigate approvals. He told me one night, "I want to make sure nobody else gets pressured like that." I watched him take pride in the same values I'd tried to pass down: hard work, straight dealing, respect that isn't bought. Money and titles come and go. The villa proved that. What lasts is knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone make you feel less for it. Douarian, who stayed close to Audran and became a true part of our small circle, put it best one afternoon when we were all together for a simple barbecue. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. Not in money or connections, but in quiet integrity. I learned that standing up for who you are isn't just brave, it's the only way to live with dignity." And I'll never forget that. Audran raised his glass. "To knowing your worth." I clinked mine against his. "And never selling it short." These days, he stops by more often. We fix things around the house, plan fishing trips, talk about the future without looking back. The lesson stuck with him, and with me. Real value isn't in what you inherit or display. It's in the character you show when you think no one important is watching. And if you're reading this wondering if standing up is worth it, take it from us. It always is. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. I hope it reminded you that your worth isn't measured by anyone else's standards. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and always choose dignity over anything else. Wishing you good health, good luck, and lots of happiness in everything you do. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. See you in the next one. Take care out there.